Angela Hayes had never imagined that a simple drive home could turn into an ordeal that would shake her to the core. Yet, on that particular evening in suburban Dallas, as she adjusted the rearview mirror of her silver sedan and prepared to leave behind the remnants of a long, tiring night, fate had other plans. The steady hum of the highway receded into a quiet murmur as Angela turned onto a less traveled road. The evening air felt heavy, imbued with the subtle melancholy of a day drawing to its close. In the soft, dim light of the street lamps, her sequined gown shimmered ever so faintly, reflecting a resilience and grace that had carried her through many challenging moments. Earlier that night, Angela had attended a fundraiser event, a noble evening spent supporting a local community center that she cared about deeply. The event had been a celebration of community spirit and hope, a gathering that underscored the center's mission to uplift those in need. Angela had felt a surge of pride at the work they were doing and had taken solace in the knowledge that her contributions were making a difference. More than anything else, however, she had been looking forward to returning home, to the comfort and love of her family, after a long and emotionally taxing night. As she merged onto the quieter road, the soft glow of the suburban streetlights contrasted with the fading brightness of the highway behind her. The gentle hum of traffic had all but vanished, leaving her with only the sound of her own thoughts. It was in this moment of solitude that her phone buzzed insistently on the passenger seat. Angela glanced at the screen to see a message from her husband, Malcolm Hayes, the newly appointed police commissioner of Dallas County. A tender smile touched her lips as she read his brief note, "Be home soon." For a moment, the promise of reunion warmed her spirit and she murmured softly to herself, "I'll be home soon," not bothering to pick up the call at that time. No sooner had those comforting thoughts taken root than a sudden, jarring flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror interrupted her reverie. Startled, Angela's eyes widened as she saw a police cruiser approaching rapidly from behind. Her heart began to pound, and a frown creased her brow. She eased her car to a stop on the side of the road, her mind racing with questions. Why was she being pulled over? Had she inadvertently broken a rule? She knew she hadn't been speeding, she hadn't run any stop signs, and she certainly hadn't been distracted by her phone. Perhaps it's just a routine stop, she tried to reassure herself, though a knot of anxiety began to form in her stomach. Taking a deep breath, Angela rolled down her window as the cruiser drew closer. A tall officer with a stern, impassive expression approached her vehicle. "License and registration," he said curtly, his tone leaving no room for debate. Without a hint of hesitation, Angela retrieved her documents from the glove compartment and handed them over. "Good evening, officer," she said politely, though her voice betrayed a subtle tremor. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" The officer took a brief glance at her license before fixing her with a clipped tone. "We received a call about a vehicle matching this description, involved in suspicious activity in the area." Angela's heart skipped a beat at the mention of suspicious activity. She repeated the phrase quietly to herself, suspicious activity, trying to steady her breathing despite the growing unease. "Step out of the car, ma'am," the officer commanded sharply, his tone brooking no argument. For a moment, Angela hesitated, uncertainty flickering in her eyes as she tried to process the situation. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I'm not sure I understand." But before she could continue, the officer interrupted, his voice growing even firmer. "Step out of the car now." Almost immediately, another cruiser pulled up behind the first, and two more officers emerged, their flashlights piercing the dark night like beacons. Angela's hand trembled as she unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door, careful to keep her hands visible, a safety measure that Malcolm had always stressed to her. "I'm complying," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "But I'd really like to know why I'm being treated this way." Her measured tone, intended to diffuse tension, seemed instead to aggravate the officers further. One officer, his face set in an expression of cold determination, began searching her car without uttering another word of explanation. He rifled through the back seat and trunk with an air of entitlement, as if convinced that her vehicle might conceal evidence of wrongdoing. The other two officers hovered close by, their eyes fixed on Angela, scrutinizing every move she made. Angela's heart pounded in her chest. She knew in her soul that she had nothing to hide. Yet, the invasive treatment and the unspoken accusation of guilt left her feeling deeply humiliated and vulnerable. Gathering her courage, Angela spoke again. "I'd like to call my husband," she stated firmly, her voice cutting through the oppressive tension like a clarion call. Almost instantly, one of the officers scoffed derisively. "You can do that after we're done here." Angela's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but she refrained from further protest. She had no desire to escalate the situation any further. Instead, she silently prayed that someone, anyone, would soon intervene, that this ordeal might end before it spiraled into something even more terrible. As Angela stood by her car in the cool night air, she watched in dismay as the officers continued their invasive search. Her perfectly organized trunk, filled with boxes of brochures and event materials from the fundraiser, was being treated as though it were a crime scene. One officer, his eyes narrowing in suspicion, held up a stack of pamphlets and demanded, "What's all this for?" Maintaining her composure, Angela replied in a steady, clear voice, "I just left a fundraiser. Those are brochures for the community center we support." The officer stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before he casually tossed the stack back into the trunk without further comment. Not long after, a second officer, a younger man with a nervous energy that belied his professional uniform, approached Angela. "Ma'am, are there any weapons, drugs, or anything illegal in this vehicle?" he asked, his tone cautious. "No, officer," Angela replied, her patience beginning to wear thin. "I told you I've done nothing wrong. I'd appreciate it if you could explain why I'm being treated this way." Instead of calming, her words seemed only to further irritate them. "We're just doing our job," the older officer barked sharply, slamming the trunk shut with a force that reverberated in the silent night. Angela glanced over at her phone, which continued to buzz insistently on the passenger seat. The caller ID displayed Malcolm's name. "May I retrieve my phone to call my husband now?" she asked politely. The officers exchanged disapproving glances, and one of them replied in a tone that implied she might be a threat. No sudden movements. Angela fought the urge to roll her eyes at their baseless assumption, but complied carefully. She reached into the car to retrieve her phone, and the officers seemed almost disappointed when nothing about her behavior further confirmed their suspicions. Yet, they were far from finished. "We're running your plates and license," one officer stated, stepping away as the spotlight from a second cruiser illuminated her car in an unrelenting beam. The relentless scrutiny, the unfounded assumptions, and the complete disregard for her dignity were infuriating. Despite the humiliation and mounting anxiety, Angela kept her cool, aware that any sign of frustration might be used as a pretext to escalate the situation further. With steady fingers, she dialed Malcolm's number. The phone rang once, twice, and he picked up almost immediately. "Angela, are you okay? I've been calling you." Malcolm's voice came through, filled with both concern and the unmistakable authority of a man used to commanding respect. Before he could say much more, Angela interjected, "Malcolm, I'm pulled over by the police and they're searching my car without any cause. I need you here now." In an instant, Malcolm's tone shifted to one of determined urgency. "Where are you?" he demanded, his voice low and commanding. "I'm coming," Angela replied, her voice faltering ever so slightly as the weight of the situation pressed down upon her. "Please hurry," she whispered, her words barely audible over the quiet hum of the night. Even as she spoke with Malcolm, Angela noticed the officers watching her more intently. Their postures stiffened, and it was as if her decision to call her husband had unnerved them further. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, each one laden with a suffocating tension. Despite the degrading treatment and the palpable humiliation, Angela stood silently by her car, her posture composed and dignified. A few passing cars slowed, their occupants craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the unfolding drama. Then, as if summoned by the intensity of the moment, the sound of a car pulling up punctuated the heavy silence. A sleek black SUV rolled to a stop nearby, and the driver's door swung open with a quiet thud. Out stepped Malcolm Hayes. His tall, commanding frame exuded authority, and his face was a study in restrained anger, tempered by measured resolve. Angela felt an immediate surge of relief mixed with apprehension. Malcolm, the newly appointed police commissioner of Dallas County, was not a man who lost his temper easily. Years of public service had taught him the value of control, even in the most heated circumstances. Without a moment's hesitation, Malcolm strode purposefully toward Angela's vehicle. He stepped out of the SUV and closed the door behind him with a definitive, resonant click that cut through the tense air. The officers glanced at him, their expressions guarded and betraying a hint of surprise at his confident approach. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, with his police badge clipped proudly to his belt and gleaming under the streetlights, Malcolm's presence shifted the balance of power immediately. "Good evening," he said, in a calm yet firm tone, his voice edged with authority. "I'm Malcolm Hayes, Dallas County Police Commissioner. I demand an explanation for why my wife is being detained and why her vehicle is being searched without cause." The older officer, clearly the one in charge, straightened his posture but avoided meeting Malcolm's unwavering gaze. "Sir, we are conducting an investigation. We received a report of suspicious activity involving a vehicle matching this description," he began in a tone that was more evasive than reassuring. Malcolm's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Suspicious activity in a sedan driven by a well-dressed woman coming from a charity event, he countered sharply. "You do realize you are speaking to Angela Hayes?" "My wife!" At these words, the younger officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner as if uncertain. The older officer cleared his throat and offered a weak explanation. "We were not aware of her identity, sir. We were simply following protocol." "Protocol?" Malcolm's voice rose slightly, laced with incredulity. "Since when does protocol allow you to search someone's car without their consent or probable cause? Did she give you permission to do this?" His words were measured but carried the weight of authority. A heavy silence fell, punctuated by murmurs from bystanders who had begun gathering near the scene, some holding their phones aloft to record every moment. Finally, Angela spoke, her voice steady despite the trembling of her heart. "Malcolm, they wouldn't even let me make a phone call at first. They treated me like a suspect from the moment I was pulled over." Malcolm turned his gaze to her, his expression softening momentarily before hardening again as he faced the officers. "Do you have any idea what kind of liability you're exposing this department to?" he demanded, his tone growing more forceful. "You are harassing an innocent citizen, my wife, without any justification. This isn't merely unprofessional, it is utterly unacceptable." One officer, clearly rattled, stammered, We were just doing our job, sir. We didn't mean—" Malcolm cut him off sharply. "Your actions suggest otherwise," he said, gesturing toward the increasing number of bystanders recording the scene. "These cameras will ensure that there is no spin later on. You will explain yourselves right here, right now." The officers exchanged nervous glances, clearly uncertain how to proceed under the full weight of Malcolm's authority. The older officer attempted to regain control by saying, "Commissioner Hayes, perhaps we can de-escalate the situation and discuss this matter back at the precinct." Malcolm let out a short, humorless laugh that did little to ease the tension. "De-escalate? You want to de-escalate now after humiliating my wife and violating her rights?" he retorted sharply. "No, we are addressing this here in public, exactly where you created this mess." By now the crowd had grown larger, with onlookers murmuring in disbelief and recording every moment on their phones. Angela remained by her car, her posture still composed despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "Call your supervisor now," Malcolm ordered, his voice leaving no room for dissent. The older officer hesitated briefly, then reached for his radio with a reluctant air. The tension in the air was palpable, the weight of accountability pressing down on the officers as they awaited the arrival of a superior. After what felt like an eternity, the faint crackle of the police radio broke the silence. "This is Lieutenant Charles Donovan. I'm en route," the older officer announced. Minutes later, though each minute felt drawn out and heavy, a black and white SUV pulled up, and Lieutenant Donovan stepped out. His uniform was impeccable, and his expression revealed a mix of annoyance and confusion as he surveyed the scene. "What's going on here?" Donovan demanded, his eyes quickly scanning the gathering. He barely glanced at Angela before turning his attention to Malcolm. "Commissioner Hayes," Malcolm replied evenly, his voice steady yet sharp. "Your officers here pulled over my wife, conducted an unwarranted search of her vehicle, and have failed to provide any legitimate reason for their actions. I demand an explanation." Donovan's eyes widened as the gravity of the situation became apparent. "Commissioner Hayes, I was not aware that this was the issue," he stammered. "Lieutenant, every citizen deserves respect and fair treatment. What is happening here is anything but acceptable." Malcolm's tone grew colder. It should not matter who she is. Every citizen deserves respect and fair treatment, and what is happening here is a gross violation of those principles. The lieutenant's face tightened as he turned to the officers. Is this true? Did you search her vehicle without cause? The older officer hesitated before answering. We had a report about suspicious activity. Donovan cut him off sharply. Cut the excuses. You had no cause. None whatsoever. And now not only have you harassed an innocent woman, but you have also put this entire department under scrutiny. Do you even understand the gravity of your actions? Donovan rubbed his temple, struggling to regain control of the situation. Commissioner, I assure you that this incident will be investigated thoroughly. I will handle it personally, Donovan promised in a measured tone. Malcolm stepped forward, his presence as commanding as ever. This isn't just about an investigation, he declared. It's about accountability. You do not get to sweep this under the rug. Not this time. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd as bystanders recorded every word on their phones. Addressing the gathered crowd directly, Malcolm's voice rose above the low hum of the tension. This is the kind of behavior we have fought for years to eliminate from our police force, he proclaimed. No one, regardless of their status, their job, or their skin color, should ever have to endure such treatment. Accountability matters. Every voice matters. A smattering of applause broke out among the onlookers, and Angela watched Malcolm with a flicker of pride in her eyes, even as the fatigue of the night weighed upon her. Lieutenant Donovan, growing increasingly uncomfortable, attempted to interject. Commissioner, perhaps we can move this conversation somewhere private. Malcolm's response was immediate and unwavering. No. Transparency happens here, in front of the people we serve. Your officers need to understand that there are consequences for their actions. If they do not face those consequences, nothing will ever change. The officers shifted uneasily, their faces betraying the realization that the balance of power had irreversibly shifted that night. In the days that followed, the fallout from that harrowing evening sparked a chain of events that no one, especially not the officers involved, could have anticipated. By the next morning, video recordings of the confrontation had gone viral, and social media was awash with hashtags like Justice for Angela and Accountability Matters. News outlets picked up the story with headlines questioning the integrity of the Dallas County Police Department. Later that morning, Angela and Malcolm sat side by side at their dining table as the soft morning light streamed through the windows. Angela, still weary from the events of the previous night, sipped her coffee in silence, while Malcolm scrolled through his phone, reading article after article and absorbing countless public comments. They're calling it the Hayes incident, Malcolm said in a heavy tone. I knew it would get attention, but it's even bigger than I expected. Angela set her cup down and met his eyes steadily. It isn't just about us, Malcolm. It's about what this represents. About how many people go through this every day without a platform to speak out. They deserve justice too. Malcolm nodded somberly. I have spent my entire career trying to root out this kind of behavior, and now it's painfully clear that there is so much more work to be done. Later that day, an emergency press conference was held. Malcolm stood at the podium, flanked by Angela and other members of the department's leadership team. His voice was calm yet resolute as he addressed a room full of reporters and community members. What happened last night is utterly unacceptable, he began. The actions of those officers were not only a blatant violation of department policy, but also a profound betrayal of the trust that this community places in its police force. I want to make one thing absolutely clear. This is not who we are, and it is certainly not who we will be. He paused, letting his words sink in. A wave of applause rippled through the room, yet Malcolm's face remained grave as he turned to Angela. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the lingering pain. When I was pulled over last night, I felt utterly powerless. I did everything right. I followed every instruction. But it didn't matter. I wasn't seen as a person. I was seen as a problem to be dealt with. And I know I'm not alone in feeling that way. But I also know that change is possible. It begins with accountability, with people speaking out, and with leaders like my husband who are willing to challenge the system from within. We have to do better, for everyone. In the days that followed, the department launched new training initiatives focused on de-escalation and addressing implicit bias. A citizens' advisory board was formed to ensure ongoing transparency and accountability within the police force. Malcolm personally reached out to community leaders, promising to rebuild trust and implement the changes that were long overdue. The officers involved in the incident faced disciplinary action, and one even chose to resign in light of overwhelming evidence. Their actions served as a stark reminder of how deep systemic issues ran, as well as how necessary it was to confront them head-on. For Angela, the experience transformed her from a victim of injustice into a passionate advocate for reform. She began using her platform to amplify the voices of those who had been silenced by systemic inequities. "It isn't just about what happened to me," she would say in interviews and public meetings. "It's about what we do to ensure that it never happens to anyone else." Her story resonated deeply with many, sparking vital conversations about civil rights, accountability, and the need for systemic change. Over time, the Hayes family turned that painful, humiliating night into a catalyst for broader change. Although the road ahead was long and fraught with challenges, they faced it together, with courage, conviction, and an unwavering belief that a better world was possible. Malcolm continued to push for meaningful reforms within the department, while Angela emerged as a symbol of resilience and hope for those marginalized by a flawed system. Their message was clear: real change begins with accountability and the courage to stand up for what is right, even when it is uncomfortable. "What can you do to make a difference?" they urged others. "Start today, speak up, push for change. Every voice matters." As the days turned into weeks, the fallout from that fateful night rippled throughout the community. Countless citizens, inspired by Angela's dignified composure and Malcolm's steadfast leadership, began demanding higher standards of accountability from their public institutions. The incident, widely dubbed the Hayes Incident, became a rallying cry for reform. News reports, social media discussions, and community meetings all centered on the idea that no one, regardless of status, occupation, or skin color, should ever be treated with such blatant disrespect. Malcolm Hayes' press conference marked the beginning of a new chapter for the Dallas County Police Department. His insistence on transparency and systemic change forced not only his own department, but also other law enforcement agencies to re-examine their practices. For Angela, the ordeal reaffirmed her commitment to justice. She continued to share her story, not out of anger, but out of hope, believing that by challenging injustice, they could build a fairer, more compassionate society. The Hayes family's journey serves as a powerful reminder that while individual incidents of injustice can scar and humiliate, they also have the potential to spark widespread change when met with courage and determination. As Angela and Malcolm worked tirelessly to bring about reform, they also encouraged others to reflect on what it truly means to treat every citizen with dignity. Their message was simple yet profound. Accountability, transparency, and empathy are the cornerstones of a just society. In the end, the events of that terrible night did more than expose the flaws of an overzealous system. They ignited a movement in which every individual, from public officials to ordinary citizens, plays a role in ensuring that no one is ever dehumanized by those sworn to protect and serve. The Hayes family's story teaches us that true change begins not with grand gestures, but with the quiet determination to stand up for what is right, even when it means facing immense personal adversity. So ask yourself, what can you do to make a difference? Whether it's speaking out when you witness injustice, supporting reforms in your community, or simply treating everyone with the respect they deserve, your actions matter. Start today, speak up, push for change. Every voice matters, and together we can create a future where justice is not merely an ideal, but a living, breathing reality for all. In the weeks and months that followed, the impact of the Hayes incident continued to reverberate throughout the community. Local organizations began hosting town hall meetings, inviting citizens to share their experiences and concerns about police conduct and accountability. Angela, drawing on her own painful experience, became an active speaker at these meetings, urging attendees to demand better treatment from public institutions. "We must hold our law enforcement accountable," she would say. "We must ensure that every individual, regardless of how they look or what they wear, is treated with dignity and respect." Malcolm, too, took decisive action. He spearheaded reforms within the Dallas County Police Department that focused not only on retraining officers in de-escalation techniques, but also on addressing the underlying biases that led to incidents like the one Angela endured. He implemented stricter protocols for conducting searches and detentions, emphasizing the need for clear, justifiable cause before any action was taken. His efforts were met with mixed reactions, but he remained steadfast, confident that true reform would bring about lasting change. As the controversy grew, local media picked up the story. Reporters from various news outlets converged on Dallas, eager to capture every detail of the unfolding drama. The story dominated headlines and social media feeds, with citizens rallying around Angela and Malcolm, demanding justice and transparency. Public opinion shifted, and soon community leaders began calling for an independent review of the department's practices. The momentum was undeniable. For Angela, the personal toll of that night was profound, yet, amid the pain and humiliation, she discovered a renewed sense of purpose. She began to use her personal experience as a platform to advocate for systemic change, speaking at community events, engaging with local activists, and even meeting with elected officials to share her story. "I felt powerless that night," she admitted in one public forum, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I have learned that our voices, when united, can create a tide of change that no one can ignore." Over time, the Hayes family's commitment to justice began to bear fruit. The department introduced new training programs designed to eliminate implicit bias and improve community relations. A citizens' advisory board was established, providing a direct channel for residents to voice their concerns and hold the police accountable. Malcolm's relentless pursuit of reform, combined with Angela's impassioned advocacy, began to transform public perceptions. The once divisive incident slowly evolved into a catalyst for meaningful change. Throughout this challenging period, Angela and Malcolm found solace in each other's strength. Their home became a sanctuary, a place where they could reflect on the hardships they had endured and draw strength from their shared commitment to justice. Even as the public scrutiny intensified and the pressure to deliver results mounted, they remained united, their resolve unshaken. "We must do better," Malcolm would often say, his tone resolute. "Not just for ourselves, but for every citizen who has ever been marginalized or mistreated." Their message resonated far beyond the confines of Dallas County. Across the state, citizens began to demand greater accountability from their law enforcement agencies. Social media campaigns, community forums, and public protest erupted, all centered on the theme that every individual deserved fair and just treatment. The movement that had been sparked by that fateful night grew into a powerful call for systemic reform, one that would continue to shape policy and practice for years to come. In the end, the Hayes family's story became a beacon of hope for those who had long felt silenced by injustice. Angela's transformation from a victim of humiliation to a tireless advocate for civil rights inspired countless others to speak out against abuse and discrimination. Malcolm's unwavering commitment to accountability and transparency set a new standard for leadership within law enforcement. Together, they proved that even in the face of deep-seated prejudice and institutional indifference, change was not only possible, it was inevitable. As the months turned into years, the legacy of that night continued to influence public policy and community relations. The reforms implemented by Malcolm Hayes and his colleagues laid the groundwork for a more just and equitable system. The principles of accountability, respect, and transparency became the cornerstones of the new paradigm. A paradigm in which every citizen's rights were fiercely protected and every voice was valued. Today, the Hayes family's journey stands as a powerful reminder that the fight for justice is never truly over. It is a continuous struggle, one that requires constant vigilance and the courage to stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult or unpopular. Their story teaches us that every act of defiance against injustice, no matter how small, can ignite a spark that transforms society. It reminds us that true change begins at the individual level, with each person choosing to challenge the status quo and demand a better world. So, ask yourself, what can you do to make a difference? Whether it is speaking out when you witness injustice, supporting reforms in your community, or simply treating every person with the respect and dignity they deserve, your actions matter. Start today, speak up, push for change, because every voice matters, and together we can create a future where justice is not just an ideal, but a living, breathing reality for all. The Hayes family's story is not merely one of personal triumph over adversity, it is a call to action for every one of us. It is a reminder that when we stand together and hold our leaders accountable, we have the power to reshape our communities and build a more compassionate society. Real change begins with accountability and the courage to stand up for what is right, even when it is uncomfortable or challenging. In the end, the night that began with humiliation and indignity became the turning point for a movement that would forever change the landscape of law enforcement and public policy in Dallas County and beyond. The legacy of that night lives on in the reforms that were enacted, in the voices of those who continue to demand justice, and in the unwavering belief that every individual deserves to be treated with fairness and respect. This is the lesson that Angela Hayes and Malcolm Hayes impart to us all, that every act of courage, every moment of standing up against injustice, contributes to the creation of a better world. Remember, your actions matter. Stand up for what is right, speak out against injustice, push for change, because together we can build a society where every person is seen, heard, and respected, and where accountability is not an option but a fundamental right for all.